We're going to move on, folks. We're going to talk about genetics and how it plays a role in prostate cancer, but how much? Here to give us all the details is Justin Lorentz, a genetic counselor. Justin practices clinically out of the Sunnybrook Cadet Cancer Center in Toronto in their cancer genetics and high risk program. He's also the lead of the Male Oncology Research and Education MORE program, a registry for men with hereditary cancer. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you so much for that. It's a pleasure to be able to speak today. I think I have 10 minutes and I have a lot to say, so I'm going to go right into it. First of all, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. Okay. So I'm a genetic counselor at Sunnybrook. So I want to talk a little bit about prostate cancer genes, some of the known genes that are associated, and what we can do differently for people's care if we know about these genes.
Hey, Justin, sorry to interrupt you. We can see your presenter view.
You can see my presenter view.
Yeah. Also, you have closer to 20 minutes, so no need to rush.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just see if I can
just go back to full screen and go to swap presenter view in the upper left-hand corner, Justin.
Oh, that's a big
okay, it's easy.
Full screen.
I promise. I do it every day. Display settings, upper left.
Upper left display settings.
There you go. Swap.
Nice. Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Cox.
Is it still in? Yeah, you're seeing all the right stuff. Okay, great. Okay, so humans are made up of billions and billions of cells. All of our cells, create our tissues, and in each of our cells we have our genes. And so this image here shows these two kind of caricature helices. Genes are very long pieces of DNA. They have instructions. They tell our body how to grow, how to function. We have two copies of every gene. One copy we inherit from mom, and the other copy we inherit from dad. And so we have these two copies that are holding hands here. Sometimes, every person in their 20,000 genes that make people, we have about 5 mutations that are causing some kind of a medical problem. And that's denoted here as being this kind of red area in the gene. If there is a gene mutation that's causing a medical problem, sometimes it can manifest as a health condition. Sometimes people will just be what are called a carrier of something, and it doesn't necessarily have a direct impact. For the purposes of this discussion, gene mutations do increase risk for certain cancers because I'm focusing on genes that protect us from cancer. And if there's a mistake or mutation in one copy, it's enough to increase the risk for certain cancers. So how are these genes passed on from one generation to the next? So what I have here is an image of a female, an image of a male. They both have 2 copies of their gene, but the male has 1 copy with a mistake or mutation on it, denoted as that red area. Now, when they go on to have kids, mom's going to pass on either one gene or the other. It doesn't matter. They're both working just fine. But the father, one of his genes has a mistake or mutation. And so when they go on to have children, there's a 50% chance he passes on the gene with the mutation, 50% chance he passes on the gene without the mutation. We call this a dominant form of inheritance, where if an individual has a genetic mutation, there's a 50% chance it can be moved on or passed on to the next generation. Now, genes are, gene mutations can happen all throughout our body. When you go out in the sun and get a sunburn, there's mutations in all of your skin cells. And sometimes these mutations are so severe that your body says, hey, we have to get rid of them, and your skin peels off. And so there's this balance act, because lots of gene or cells that never once had a mutation, they may develop them over time. And that's how all cancers occur. Therefore, all cancers have a genetic origin. Really, what this image shows is how a normal cell, for example, a normal prostate cell, if it accumulates a mistake or a mutation in a cancer-protecting gene, then it can start, kind of going rogue or deviating. It no longer fully identifies as a prostate cell. Now it's kind of its own little selfish group of cells that start just collecting resources. And as they grow, more mutations happen in different parts of this tumor. And you end up getting this, what was once a cluster of prostate cells now becomes this tumor that has all these different gene mutations inside of them. And so that's the natural history, of the natural way with which cancer happens. Is a very a normal cell will just by chance accumulate mistakes and mutations that puts it down this trajectory of becoming cancerous. Now, I say that because that explains why most cancer happens. We call this sporadic cancer. Cancer that happens, I call it by bad luck, by chance. 70 to 80% of cancers happen this way. 70 to 80% of cancers are like lightning striking. But there could be cancers that are that occur because of some kind of an inherited genetic predisposition. If there is a mistake or a mutation in a gene that protects us from cancer, some of these cells might actually have a higher chance of going down that slippery slope. And that accounts for about 10 to 15% of cancers, hereditary. Familial cancers are the genetics world's fancy way of saying, well, there's definitely something going on that's increasing risk in this family, but it's probably too complex for us to really understand. And so we say there's something going on, but we don't necessarily know what. So how is testing even done? We talk a lot about genetic testing, but nowadays, there's different types of genetic testing. And some people will say, well, yeah, my prostate cancer had genetic testing. And other people will say, well, they took a blood sample from me and did genetic testing. Those are the two basic ways that we do testing, but they test for different things. So most commonly, genetic testing is done using a blood sample or a saliva sample. Truly, it doesn't matter which sample we use. All that we're looking for is just some type of tissue that a person has, and we're looking to do a genetic test on the cells in that tissue to see if there's a gene mutation. So whether we use blood or saliva, we're actually just looking at white blood cells. So it's really just testing the bone marrow. We could do a skin biopsy too, but that's pretty invasive. And we're testing the cells, the white blood cells, to see if there's a mutation. And if there is a mutation, we say, okay, well, that mutation is probably present in every single cell that person has. And we would say that includes their sperm cells. There's a 50% chance they pass this gene mutation on. If there is no gene mutation there, we say, okay, well, maybe this person got cancer for other reasons, happened by chance or sporadically. The other type of testing we do is actually from the prostate biopsy itself, or we call these liquid biopsies, where we're actually looking at cancer tissue and we're doing genetic testing on that. And we'll always find something. Cancer is full of mutations. And so we always find a huge profile of gene mutations when we test tissue. And the reason why we test it is because it can give some physicians insight on how to treat someone's cancer. We call that personalized medicine. Honestly, all medicine is pretty personalized, but this is really just focusing on the specific mutations a person's cancer has and trying to target that cancer by doing that. So we call that tissue testing. The other one we call germline testing. Germ cells are sex cells like eggs and sperm, and that's where the mutation is. And so it's present in every one of our body, because we get half of our genes from mom's egg, the other half from dad's sperm. And so when we do this germline testing on people, there's some indications where we see a high rate of these gene mutations. And in the world of prostate cancer, these are individuals who have prostate cancer that's spread to other parts of their body. We call that metastatic prostate cancer. And this huge groundbreaking study happened in 2016, where this individual took 700 men who had prostate cancer that had spread, did genetic testing, and find that about 12% of them have some kind of a gene mutation. That's huge. And so in Canada, where I'm hoping that most clinics, if someone has metastatic prostate cancer, is offering genetic testing looking at some of these genes. I know in BC that's the case. I know in Ontario that's the case. I know in Quebec it's case by case. And so different provinces have different rules, but I'm hoping that as a country we can align on this one indication for genetic testing when someone has metastatic prostate cancer. So here are some of the genes in that pie chart, and I'll talk a little bit more about them as well, because there's some specific features about these that I think are pretty interesting. But the world is constantly changing. And so 2 years later, another study came out and said, hey, well, people who have this specific type of pathology, when doctors look at their prostate tissue under the microscope, they say, yeah, there's something a little bit special here. They call that intraductal or ductal pathology. One study said, yeah, these men also have high rates of prostate cancer gene mutations. And then 3 years later, another study came out and said, no, I don't think that that's actually true. And so I bring this up to say that science is always changing, and what we know is only based on what knowledge is available to us at this time. And in years from now, things can change. But the world of prostate cancer genetics is changing quite rapidly. When someone approaches genetic testing, we sometimes think about, what about life insurance, critical illness insurance? Could they discriminate against someone if someone does have a genetic predisposition? They can't. We have a federal law that prevents these companies from accessing or using our genetic tests against us, but they can still use your personal history against you. They can still use your family history against you when it comes to that discrimination. I set a timer just to see how I'm doing for time. So we talked about these hereditary pieces, but I want to focus a little bit on the familial piece. We know that 5 to 15% of cancers can be attributed to this. And so what this chart shows is an RR, or a relative risk relative to the general population. So a man who has a brother with prostate cancer, that man's risk for prostate cancer is 3.4-fold higher compared to the general population. If a man has a father and a brother with prostate cancer, that man's risk for prostate cancer is 5-fold higher. It's a huge genetic risk. We don't know necessarily the genes that are associated with it. We do know that family history is a big predictor of someone's risk themselves for getting prostate cancer. Another cohort of individuals who are at elevated risk for some genetic reason are individuals of West African and Caribbean ancestry. Now, what do these two geographical locations have in common? The slave trade. And so we have two populations that are in different parts of the world that one originated the other, and we see a higher rate of prostate cancer. What I have here is a heat map where the red shows rates of mortality or death due to prostate cancer, and the cooler colors, blues, are the decreased or lower number of mortality. And again, in this geographical area, we see West Africa and the Caribbean as these high mortality rates. And we start wondering, is there something genetic in this geographical location that's increasing risk? Maybe just socioeconomic or other factors may not be enough to account for this discrepancy. Maybe there's something inherently genetic, but we don't know too much about that at this time. The last thing I want to focus on are what's called heritability. And this is a way that we study individuals' risk by comparing twins. We look at identical twins versus fraternal twins. And if an identical twin gets prostate cancer, what's the chance that his other twin is going to get prostate cancer? Versus fraternal twins, they're like brothers. They don't have the same genes. What's their rate of getting prostate cancer? And what we identified is that men with prostate cancer, if they have an identical twin, that identical twin is very likely to get prostate cancer as well. It means there's something in their DNA that's increasing risk. In fact, prostate cancer is more heritable than ovarian cancer or breast cancer, even though we think about these cancers being quite genetic. Prostate cancer might be more genetic. The issue is that we don't know a lot about these single gene, single cause mutations. We call that monogenic. That maybe isn't accounting for a lot of why prostate cancer happens. Maybe prostate cancer is more polygenic, multiple genes increasing risk. We just are really bad at this time in doing polygenic testing. So I want to focus on these monogenic factors. What we have here is a chart that has a list of a whole bunch of acronyms. These are genes. HOXB13 is the only prostate cancer gene. Greatly increases risk for prostate cancer, but we don't know whether or not prostate cancer ends up being more aggressive. So that's one of the genes that we test for when we do germline testing. BRCA1, BRCA2, made famous by Angelina Jolie, is also a gene that increases risk for prostate cancer. BRCA2, prostate cancer will get aggressive unless it's treated and managed. If it's let to do its thing, it will ultimately become quite aggressive. Other individuals with gene mutations are Beyonce Knowles' father. He has a BRCA2 gene mutation. And this gene was identified by Mary Claire King with a bunch of other physicians, including Stephen Narod, who's at Women's College Hospital in Toronto, where I'm affiliated with. What they realize is this condition is actually called hereditary breast ovarian cancer syndrome. Men don't have ovaries, men have very little breast tissue. And we wonder whether or not this name and this association of breast cancer with the BRCA genes is accounting for the discrepancy in men who get testing. 1/10 of men who have 1/10 of people with gene mutations who get testing are men. And so there's kind of this question, should we call it King syndrome as opposed to hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndrome? But then again, it gets more gendered towards men, but an interesting kind of aside. Lynch syndrome, another set of genes that can increase risk for prostate cancer. Lynch syndrome is also connected to colon cancer, uterine cancer, stomach cancer. And some of the gene mutations in Lynch syndrome can cause more aggressive cancer. ATM, like the ATM machine, is another gene that increases risk. 1% of Caucasians have a mutation in this gene. And so for men with prostate cancer, sometimes if they're on active surveillance, ATM might be a predictor that they might not do as well on active surveillance, and maybe be a good piece of information to know, to say, maybe we should be more inclined to do treatment as opposed to following an active surveillance plan. CHEK2, another gene that increases risk for prostate cancer. Not CHEK1, but CHEK2. When it comes to treatment, when we do genetic testing, there's a little bit that we know in terms of how we can manage risk. For BRCA2 carriers, we think about, perhaps an individual might be a better candidate for surgery because we could do a full pathology review. When it comes to active surveillance, as BRCA1 carriers and ATM carriers, should they be on that? For as long, should they be followed differently? The thing is that it's kind of the Wild West. We don't really know yet. There's not any major recommendations. This part of medicine still being refined. What there is more insight into is that if men do have metastatic cancer and they have one of these gene mutations, there are therapeutic options available. For BRCA1, BRCA2, and ATM, if someone has a germline mutation in that, or a mutation in their tissue in any of these genes, they may be candidates for PARP inhibitors. If a man has Lynch syndrome and has prostate cancer, he may be eligible for these PD-1 inhibitors as a form of more systemic therapy for prostate cancer. And so I guess the take home is that if a man has metastatic prostate cancer, he should be asking about genetic testing. Genetic testing can give information not only for him about potential treatment, but he inherited these genes from mom or from dad. He could pass them on to children, and siblings could have these gene mutations. And if so, a gene mutation identified in a man could have implications, definitely has implications for the family as well, and can give them this preparedness to say, okay, well, if I'm at increased risk, let me screen more carefully. For women, some of these genes increase risk for breast and ovarian cancer, and can give insight for children's daughters, sisters, parents, cousins, aunts. That's what I want to talk about.
Wow, that was great. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for making something that's really complicated. Thanks for explaining in a way that I can understand part of it, because I'm pretty stupid about that. So that was great.
Murray,
Yep.
Can I ask him a quick question here before he heads out? If my dad had prostate cancer, my husband had prostate cancer, we have 2 sons.
Mm-hmm.
Should they be genetically tested?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So if we're looking for a genetic mutation that's causing a health condition like prostate cancer, the person most likely to have that gene mutation is the person with the health condition. So if we're ever going to offer genetic testing, the best person to test is the person with prostate cancer. And if they have the mutation, then we test children and other family members to see if they've inherited that gene mutation. So we always start with the person who's most likely to have the gene mutation. Once we find it, we then know who to test and how to test.
Awesome, thank you.
And so anybody can ask their treating oncologist whether they're eligible for genetic testing, and their treating oncologist can refer them to a genetics clinic.
Great. Thanks, Justin.
No worries.